Hello and welcome to PolitiGood. My name is Rachel Parker.
I'm Tim Fullerton.
Tim, podcast number 2, the sequel, you could say.
We're back.
We're going to do this. I think we're going to be doing this, quite often, actually.
Yeah.
How did you feel about podcast number 1? I want to get your feeling about it.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely felt like a first episode, and I've never done one before, so
right.
I there was obviously listening back to it. There were some things I would do differently, but overall, I thought the conversation with the guys, the White Dudes for Harris crew, was really good, and I think there was a lot of stuff in there that was interesting to people. And judging by the reaction that we got on the first one, I think we did pretty well. We even made it on the Apple podcast chart under the government section. I think we got up to 18, so it was a good start.
Yeah, so I would say like getting in the top 20 for a first episode is kind of shocking. Anyway, I liked it too. What I liked about the way that we sort of like established ourselves in this space is that like we were all sort of dealing from the same deck, and that like we sort of all want the same things, which is good outcomes for human beings. It's not about the success of a party. Which I think is what really differs us from the right, is that the right is primarily about success for a party. And in our world, it's a more jumbled tent. It's bigger. It's harder to get everybody to sort of align their goals together. But we weren't necessarily all in agreement about what the tactical problems are, and B, like what the obvious solutions are. And that's how you know it's a good conversation, right? Like,
yeah, exactly. And I think if anybody goes on to a podcast or posts on social media that they know fully why Donald Trump won, stop listening to them.
Stop listening. Nobody knows.
No, we don't know. I mean, there are things that there are pieces of things that we know we have to fix, and we're going to talk about some of that now. But to know the swing and why people stayed home, and like there are theories, but like we don't know, and we're not going to know until all of the data comes in, and even then we're going to have a conversation about what that looks like.
And even then, like when the data comes in, like I sort of liken this. This is a terrible analogy, but I'm going to make it anyway. A million years ago, my aunt, who's super funny, went to the self-help conference. Like the self-help ladies thing. She's 90 now. So this was probably in the 80s during the height of like during the self-help boom. And she was at this women's group, but there was a woman who wrote a book about relationships, and they're going around the table going around the room talking about like, why did you marry that person? And all these women were like, oh, because I had a bad childhood and everything was terrible and whatever. And they got to this woman who my aunt said was sitting like basically like across from her so she could see her face. And the woman said, I only married the ones who asked. And I always think that there is some application of that to politics, which is like we have a lot of chairs to fill every single time there's an election. And, you're sort of stuck with imperfect people running imperfect campaigns with imperfect staffers and a lot of guesswork. So, autopsies are wonderful for some things because, you and I are data people. We work in the world of data. We do marketing messaging. We measure things. We look at what that worked. And that doesn't always work with campaigns. That's always the hardest part to swallow, is to go, well, sometimes you propose, and the person's like, I only have 2 choices, and you're both. And it was a nasty year for, my thing is that it was a nasty year for incumbents. It's just kind of like that is the hard part. So what we're going to talk about today, so relates to this. I don't want to go too far down that lane because we, Tim and I have this problem, by the way, for listeners, that like we're both talkers and we love to talk about this issue. So even when we're supposed to be talking about clients and work, 25 minutes later, I'll be like, okay, so now you know everything about the Claire McCaskill, Josh Hawley race, but we still have a meeting to conduct. So anyway, you had a very strong, visceral sort of like, I want to talk about this very thing before we scheduled this recording. So I want to just tee it up, talk about that, and then that's the conversation we're going to have, which I'm super excited about.
Yes. Well, one of the things that we do know is that the Democrats and liberals and progressives, I'm going to put everybody together, the messaging is broken. The way that we communicate our issues and the way that we say the words about the issues, I think is in desperate need of an overhaul. I think that, relying on $1.5 billion of TV ads is a failed model. And if it was a successful model, we would be having a much different conversation today. That doesn't mean get rid of it. It means we need a reset on the types of media that we are communicating on, or anybody. And the thing about this is it's not just about Democrats. This is about businesses and nonprofits. Like, we are now in an age where the traditional ways to get your message across and either convert supporters or customers or whatever has completely changed. And I think that the conservative space has done a lot better job of cultivating, I hate the term new media, because that was the name of the team that I was on in 2008 on the Obama campaign. And that was 16 years ago. So I don't think we can call that.
It's not new. It's just, we'll just say the media space is what it is, right? Like, the media space is how people consume information. That is media. Right. And the systems that distribute that content to people is media. So I don't care if it's new, old, digital, traditional, print, whatever. Like, it is what it is. It's where eyeballs are. It's where ears are. So let's talk about. So let's break this down a little bit, because I think it's really important. So what we're specifically talking about is not what's being said. That we can talk about that. That is subjective and difficult and like A/B tested to death and whatever. We're talking about how the message actually reaches the people. And I think that what I really want to talk about initially is, let's talk about two things. One, let's talk about the decline of local media consumption by way of television, because the broadcast model, this is a very poorly kept secret, is, let's just say, cratering. I mean, if you look at CNN's numbers, whether it's, broadcast or cable, it's all falling apart. And then I want to talk about how the social space is kind of fracturing, the social media space is kind of fracturing and decentralizing at sort of the same time, and where that leaves kind of like, how do you find your people? But let's start with local broadcast media, and how can we kind of recompensate and reposition ourselves? Because we have a midterm coming up and we have to really think about this. You're a strategist. Where does your money go? Let's talk about first, like, the just piles of money that the Harris campaign spent in local media, and where the opportunities are to pick up those kind of, I'll say, like, kind of shattered and decentralized audience numbers now.
Right. I mean, I think that is the biggest question that we face right now, is like, how do you do that? And obviously the advertising model of the past, where you create ads and you put them on TV, is not reaching the people that we need to reach anymore. I think that we do need to get more local, but in a different way than I think has been traditional. Like, there's still the need to, work with reporters and make sure stories are in there and your perspectives and things like that. But really, most Americans aren't listening to this anymore. And they're certainly not watching ads. I mean, my TV viewing now is almost exclusively, Hulu, YouTube, HBO Max, things like that. And on Hulu, there's ads. For the minute and a half that the ads come up, I open my phone. Now, that might say something about me not being able to focus on anything for any length of time, but I think that's everybody now. So really what we need to do is start to foster a community of people that have their own communities online, and work with them to make sure that our message is getting across. I'm going to give an example here of something I heard the other day, and this is certainly not for everybody, because first of all, the conversation, I would say, could be triggering for certain people, and there's some language that I would never use, but a comedian named Stavros went on the Theo Von show. Now, Theo Von is a former Real World Road Rules contestant who then turned this into a podcast empire, sort of in the realm of Joe Rogan, but maybe more jokey, definitely with a conservative bent. He interviewed Donald Trump, but he did not interview Kamala Harris. But he asked this comedian, who is left of center, why are people scared of a Donald Trump presidency? And I think he asked it earnestly. It wasn't like a gotcha or anything like that, because these are two guys that I think are friends. So this comedian, when he was asked why people were scared of a Donald Trump presidency, he really broke it down in a way that I thought was tangible, and in particular for that audience, which probably is not hearing a lot of left-leaning content. And he said, I am worried about women having access to health care because of these extreme abortion laws. And he just sort of did it in a very casual way, in a like man-to-man conversation, which, like I said, is not for everybody, but for that audience, I think that was one of the first times that they heard that. And then he went on to talk about, you know, the fears in the LGBTQ plus community and some other things. And, you know, and he was even at one point, Theo Von said something that isn't correct. That was like, well, you know, because like, well, there's also like all these immigrants coming across the border and committing sexual assault and things like that. And he kind of like, instead of getting into a huge argument about that, he was just like, well, there are plenty of U.S. citizens that are committing those.
He called them bespoke rapists, which I thought was just like, that's so
right.
And I've been saying, like, not to interrupt you, not to interrupt your flow, but I've been saying for a long time, the only cure to Roganism is male comedians, because because Rogan has sort of a chokehold on this sort of section of and like some of us, like, you know, David Cross and people like that, Tim Heidegger, like they've done a really good job of sort of like making fun of him and just like, what do you like? But I think that comedians in general are reluctant to call each other out because it's sort of like in their nature to be like, we like to push the boundaries and but I think that's like, come for your boys, like get on these podcasts. So how do we encourage more of that is a really good, like, I think that's the next question is like, how do we convince people that we need your help? Because if I go on a Theo Von podcast right now, just imagine that because I'll go anywhere. I don't care. It's fine. First of all, he's not going to ask me. On no planet.
Right.
Is that dude going to be like, wait, she's liberal. She votes. She's a Cory Bush supporter. She lives in St. Louis, Missouri, not Missouri, Missouri. She lives in St. Louis, Missouri. St. Louis isn't the real Missouri. Like, he's going to do all that. And then the minute that I challenge him on any of this stuff, it's going to turn into a sort of a bickering match, probably, even if I didn't want it to. And then he would clip the parts where I look the craziest.
Oh, so sure.
How do we get in touch with, like, how do we create that network of people?
So the right has done this, and they have done it very well, and they've done it in a variety of ways that have kind of come together. Not, I don't think deliberately, but it's kind of a perfect storm. They fund this. They fund right-wing influencers, podcasters, so that they can go on and say the things they want without having to worry about a paycheck. I mean, you even see, like, there's the reports that came out where Russians were funneling money into right-wing influencers like these guys like Benny Johnson and Tim Pool. They were paying them $400,000 a month to run these podcasts. So what is that? 1.2 million? No, that's more than that. It's 5 million a year, whatever it is. They don't have to, and from a Russian perspective, it's money well spent because they are pushing messages. Now, I'm not saying that we need a left version of that to spew lies and nonsense, but we need to support these creators. I mean, there's been reports done where a lot of influencers on the left start doing this stuff and they can't sustain it because the revenue model doesn't work. Left wing has a right wing or an outrage machine, but it's not like the Republican side, and they don't all speak in unison, and they're kind of like and the liberal ones are left out on their own. So we need to develop. It's almost like in baseball with a farm system. Right. You bring people in on the early stages, and you work with them, and you give them support, and you grow them. And instead of like, everyone's like, we need the left Joe Rogan. No, we don't. We need homegrown, authentic voices speaking to their communities. Like you, Rachel, you talk to your communities. Stavros, that guy, can go to Theo Von. And everybody needs to have the same core, but their message is different. And we're in such a niche market at this point that broad messaging doesn't work.
Well, so I'm going to build on that because, like, I am one of the things that I always tell Tim is, like, you know, like, I'm the liberal lady in the red state, and it's kind of a joke, but, like, it's true. And I have the experience of building a podcast channel that talks about progressive issues, not necessarily Democrats. We used to, my old podcast, the Heartland Pod, we were very critical of a lot of Democrats in Missouri, plenty of them, in fact. And one of the challenges is that if you're counting on someone like me, so if you live in a densely populated area And if you think the solution to all of this is that the people who I worked with could build their own sustainable channel and just communicate these progressive issues to people. Yes, Tim is shaking his head, and it's exactly right. The funnel is not big enough, to use a marketing term. There are not enough. I would talk to. I'll just say this: like I was talking to people that run for office all the time in Missouri. We're constant contact with them, and I got a cold call from one of them who was raising money. She was, doing her fundraising calls. She was running for a very gerrymandered Democratic district in St. Louis County. And she said, "Can you give me a donation?" And I said, "Do you know who I am?" I was just being 4 years. We did this podcast for 4 years. The only homegrown podcast in Missouri that talks about Democrats at all, right? No, I don't. 2, I don't listen to podcasts. That was her excuse. And I'm not going to throw her under the bus. She was a nice woman. We have really draconian term limits, and it's in Missouri. It's terrible. But I thought, well, okay, that's fine and dandy that you don't. Why not? Why don't you listen to podcasts? Because every single person that votes for Donald Trump has a media diet that includes someone talking to them through a speaker. Mm-hmm. Whether it was Rush Limbaugh, who's from Missouri, right? Or Joe Rogan or whoever. And one of the this is where I'm going to say, first of all, so let's just we can't do this by ourselves. We talked to people who were stakeholders within the Missouri Democratic Party. And my business partner said exactly what you just said. Money will solve this problem, but we cannot do it without money, period. We can't do it. We can't grow the audience any bigger. We need to contact people outside of our own geographic space, because we can't, if you're just counting on someone from Missouri to gather all the ears in Missouri that listen to, it can't work. It's not sustainable. We can't do it.
No, and it doesn't work anywhere unless you've got somebody who's independently wealthy doing it. And frankly, that's a very difficult, and this is hard stuff to do. Going through this journey on the podcast, there are 2 other people behind this besides us, 4 people running this, and most people don't have the resources to do that. We have an agency. This is part of the stuff that we do, so it makes sense for us. But the reality is, let's take Missouri for example. You should be funded by whether it's the Democratic Party or an outside group of funders, but there's also that promotion element of it too.
That's right.
That woman doesn't know you because you guys were doing it on your own. You had no support, and no one was also telling them to go watch that.
That's right.
So it is a money problem, but it is also a strategy issue too, that somebody has to be coordinating these activities. That's you should watch the Heartland podcast, or you should watch PolitiGood, or it's a podcast that has 10 plus. And this is the thing I think we need to do too. A podcast that talks about politics 10% of the time and is entertainment 90% of the time.
Right.
But the 10% is from a left leaning perspective, so that you're not shouting at people and forcing politics down their throat, but it's an accent to the stuff that you really like.
And I think that's a really good point too, is that the outrage machine. So this is one of the things that I said during the White Dudes, or a version of it during the White Dudes interview, is that it is a false equivalency to say we have to do what they do on the right. It's a different, the right wing machine has always, this is true of not just America. This is true of every conservative post-fascist movement. Or any kind of homegrown fascist far right populist movement, is that they feed on fear and outrage. That's what they do. That's the kind of propaganda they build. The left is already mad. They're already informed. They know what the problems are. They understand. They need the left. This is what the left needs. They need community. They need empathy, and they need a platform. And we need to all know each other. Mm-hmm. And the various, and I don't know what to say. You would hope that would be the Democratic National Convention. But the Democratic National Convention serves a different purpose, which is to nominate a president. That's what it does. That's all the convention's good for. That's all it's going to do. So we need other forms of physical spaces where we can all get together and talk to each other. That would help a lot. And we also need, like you said, we need grants. We need things that will help independent media sustain itself. And, the State's Newsroom Project is a good example of the kind of eat your vegetables, super fantastic, wonderful, keep doing what you're doing. But that's not what we're talking about either. A podcast like ours can feature someone from that type of journalistic environment where we can have them on and we can have like a relaxed, comfortable conversation, so that by the time you go read the article about some horrible thing that a far-right Republican state legislature has done to women's rights or the LGBTQ community or the environment or whatever, you've been kind of primed so that you already have the nice hormones in your brain from the yucks, so that you can actually read it without getting even angrier, right?
Right. Well, I think that's 100% right. And I think that the challenge with some of this stuff, too, is that there are so many different levels that we need to play on. Right. Like, I would say that PolitiGood is probably a podcast for a well-informed audience that wants to talk about really important things. And our stuff can be like translated to those entertainment podcasts. We're sort of in a different realm, but we need, like, I want Stavros to have a podcast, right? Like, I want that guy, like, someone should help that. Maybe he has one. I don't know. But like, if he does, I'm going to go listen to it.
Every comedian has a podcast. That's
why. But like, the point is, like, those should be promoted. Like, there should be a network of, and they're not even progressives. I just like a network of like ordinary people, because we know that the policy issues that Democrats push are popular. We've talked about in Missouri raising the minimum wage and passing a right to abortion.
That's right.
So, and we got clobbered at the state level. But so the majority is on our side. We have to create content that they want to ingest on a daily basis. This is not oh my God, it's the midterms now, everybody jump in for 4 months. It is an always on ecosystem. And you can listen to politics with us or policies. Let's use that. Stavros, he does a podcast and he talks about politics 10% of the time. That is fine. But we have to, as a group, as a community, come together and figure this out. Like, they spent and I don't blame the Kamala Harris campaign. I think they ran a very good campaign, but they spent $1.4 billion on ads. It shows you the money is there. You can, $100 million, which isn't even 10%. It's like 5%, could fund this entirely.
Well, and that's right, and that's what
actually then some. I mean, that's a lot.
Right, but. And I think, that's to your point right there, that like the right has a lot more money than the left does generally, right? Right. But the left has popular issues and popular people. So how do you connect? So like, I really like Mark Cuban. I'm not going to take a shit on him, but he said yesterday on Blue Sky, which I'm enjoying, by the way. He said the reason that Donald Trump won is because of Gensler and his stance on crypto. And I was like, okay, of all the hot takes I've seen you make in a long time, Mr. Cuban, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And I think one of the problems is that like people with a lot of money are conveniently liberal when it suits them, and they can come and go from it whenever they want. When if Mark Cuban, and again, like, he's the wrong person to pick on, because I think he does sort of, in some instances, kind of live his values. He's been very good in terms of like the DEI conversation, for example. I think that's been fantastic. He talks all the time about like, tax me more. I don't care. I'm fine. I'll be okay. But we don't, the minute that we do have a millionaire or a billionaire that's like funneling money towards these, kind of our quote unquote, our media ecosystem, they become the ire of the right. Yeah. I mean, I don't know if you've gotten your check from Hillary Clinton or whatever lately. I'm still waiting for it.
I haven't gotten that one yet.
But I think that we're not going to really be able. We have to rebuild. So we're in sort of this rebuild phase right now. And I personally think that as frustrated, my God, I think I made a joke about this with you already. I can't remember, but like the 1,600 word heartfelt essays that I've read in the last week about like why I've left X by so-and-so. like Dear The Guardian, I don't care. I don't care that you're not on X anymore. Just shut up. Don't pick up. Stop it. Let's lean into the fact that we are moving back to an era where everybody isn't on the same platform all the time, everywhere. And when people talk about this new fractured global ecosystem and it's going to be harder for people overseas, I don't care. I never grew up in an era where I expected to have access to the same media information that somebody did in Czechoslovakia, or excuse me, the Czech Republic, or whatever. Like that, I'm okay with things being a little bit more. Maybe you disagree with me, people who are listening to this. I don't know. But the reality is here. So I think that's an opportunity, right? So I think we should dig into what the opportunities are right now. If you get in early on this new decentralized ecosystem, what are the success opportunities that you think we can expect now?
Well, first of all, I was a Twitter power user for a long time. I joined in 2013. So it was my favorite app for a long time. But one of my favorite sayings about Twitter is not real life. It never has been. And it never will be. Now, there was certainly benefits to using it, like especially if you wanted to get in front of press. Like I'll be honest, like most of my interviews that I've gotten over the course of my career have come from Twitter. And so, yeah, it's a bummer that I don't really have that anymore. But like, OK, that's fine. But it was never good at predicting elections, and it was never good at reading the mood of the country. And in fact, it gave you an insulated view because it was mostly inside the Beltway, folks. And yes, I was one of those people for a while. Big names. So like in the new world, which I am really, really excited about, this decentralization world, you can in the future post on one account and have it go everywhere. So it doesn't really matter. The problem right now is we're in a transitional phase that really the only ones that do this right now are Threads, sort of. And Blue Sky is moving in that direction of a decentralized network, along with Mastodon. So like I could post on Threads, and I've turned on what's called Fediverse sharing, which everybody should do, by the way. If you're on Threads, you should turn on Fediverse sharing. And it posts to Mastodon as well. So I'm hitting 2. Eventually, Blue Sky will be part of that. Twitter, I think, seems like it's always going to be a walled garden, and I think that's going to hurt them. So what that actually does is reduces the need to be worried about jumping on the next big thing.
That's right.
Because you can just turn it on. Now, we're not there yet. And so that's some of the angst of people who have built followers on Threads. And now all of a sudden, Blue Sky has like skyrocketed. And I'll be honest, Meta has screwed up Threads many different ways.
Yep.
Deprioritizing news and politics, which what else are people talking about every day on a real-time app? They tried to Instagram it, and it's
sports.
Just not right. Yeah,
I would have if I were Meta, I would have leaned into sports so hard initially and given everybody that sort of real time. That was what Twitter was always good at, is that real time. Right. That's what made it go, was the real timeness of sports conversations, and Threads could have kept that. Whatever. Yeah, we. But could, they did. Yeah,
but they also, they're not really a real. I mean, they're sort of a real time app, but not really. Like,
right.
And I think it's gotten better, but like, but anyways, like we're moving into a world which, you shouldn't have to worry about that. So you can build your audiences, frankly, wherever they are, rather than doing what we're all doing right now, which is like posting on one and then posting it on the 4 and then like trying to engage across 4 platforms, which is really hard.
Yes.
So I'm really interested. I think this is like a real democratization of social media, like sort of like how it was 10 years ago.
Right. And so I think what needs to happen in the near immediate term, right? And, we can talk about, and at some point, I'm sure that we'll spend more time talking about less connected spaces because there's more of them than people realize. And, I think everybody should have access to high-speed broadband because obviously, like, it's impossible to live your life now without it. But that does not instantly mean that those places are going to become less insulated from bad information, right? If that were true, then everybody would have probably rejected a lot of, would have been more familiar with Donald Trump's relationship to Project 2025, which I think Democrats were overly assumptive that they made too many assumptions about that. We can talk about that all day. My recommendation for people who are listening to this and who are like, I know, but where do I start? I'm an organizer. I am a writer. I want to be more influential. I don't really want to be an influencer. What do I do? You cannot right now have too many conversations with someone who understands the intersection of information distribution and technically how it actually works. Just grab coffee with somebody that who's like, it doesn't have to be somebody who like agrees with you politically. I'm just saying, like, if you don't know how this stuff works, like the guts of it, just sit down and be like, explain open web to me. Dumb it down. Make it as simple as possible and buy that person lunch or whatever. And then talk to someone who's shown some level of success as a PR professional or a dig comms professional who understands what the network is going to look like in the future. Do those 2 things. Don't do anything else. Don't do anything else. Just do those two things if you're starting to inform yourself. If you are someone who's already like, and Tim, feel free to interrupt me and jump in or whatever. If you're already kind of like, I get it, I understand. I understand those things. You're preaching to the choir. The next thing I would do is I would start, if you're one of those people that's like, I want to be a voice. I want to build a network. I want to help. I want to build. You've got to kind of, you've got to sort of activist this and organizer this a little bit, right? You got to put that hat on because nobody is going to come. You got to understand publishing too. Like the old world, people have this idea. Well, then I'm going to kick this to you, Tim. People have this really romantic, nostalgic, kind of absurd Sex and the City fantasy of what it was like to be a writer and what it was like to be a publisher 20 years ago. Like all you needed was a little bit of grit. No, you didn't. You needed millions of dollars. You needed a Condé Nast or a big publisher to help you set something up. The vast majority of publications, new magazines and so forth failed. They didn't go. It's very difficult. It was very hard, very labor intensive. So it's vaguely easier. There's a lot more noise. But you know, you got to know that you're going to be operating. Like you have to kind of figure that part of it out. And go ahead, Tim. Go ahead.
So what I'll say about this is, and I agree with all of that, and I think the romanticization, I think I got that mildly right, of what it was like 20 years ago. It's just it's romanticized. It's not real. It was hard to write books back then and make money on books back then. It is harder now, no doubt about it. But like, let's not kid ourselves that this was easy at one point. And, you know, our recommendations, by the way, are not easy things to do. Like the reality is like, you can't just whip up your phone and throw a random thought out there once a day and expect to get an audience. And I think there's sort of a little bit of that feeling on some of these social channels. It's like, well, I'm not growing, so I'm not going to bother with this anymore. And it's like, well, but are you engaging with people? Like, are you going into the comments of thoughtful conversations and adding value? Not just saying like, I agree 100%, which some of that's fine, but you're not going to grow with that. But like, that's how you grow, is you have to provide value. It's all, and this is the same for politics, business, again, nonprofits. Like you have to provide value to people. People are too busy to like, you know, all these people are like, follow me back. I'm like, well, why? Like, do you have something to say? I mean, I don't mean it in like a rude way, but like there's an expectation out there, like people with like tens of thousands of followers. Well, you should follow everybody back. And it's like, yeah, but that ruins my experience because then my For You page is useless. So, but if you have something important to say, or you are engaging with me in a thoughtful way, that's much more of a way to get me to follow back. So I think you have to find your position and your angle. Yeah. And, you know,
what is your lane? What's your lane? What's your lane? So I will tell people what my lane is. Ready? Because I have one. We wouldn't be doing this if I didn't, by the way. Like if I didn't have a lane, Tim would be like, I don't want to do a podcast. That's not interesting. Probably. My lane is what I said is that like there's not enough people who are living within sort of that like place that everybody calls the flyover, who don't know how to differentiate between from Iowa to Kansas or whatever, that can have her voice or their voice heard by people who don't live in spaces like this. The minute that becomes irrelevant, I will move lanes happily. I will be like, oh, cool, there's somebody younger and more about. People inside of the spaces that I'm talking about talk to each other and they're frustrated and angry and exhausted, and it's a different thing. I would say Tim's lane is a little bit more, for people who know him, it's a little bit more obvious because you're kind of, but I think it's interesting. I'm going to tell you what I think your lane is, and you can say if you agree. So your lane is that your career started at the dawn of social media. And you established yourself very early as someone that was like, we've got to get on this, brands and politicians and people like that. And you didn't really have much experience as a professional before that world existed, but you built your success in that world. And so you're one of the few people that I know who can kind of talk about it from a very holistic perspective because of all this, because of the synthesis of your experience, right? Mm-hmm. You've worked in the public space, you've worked in campaigns, you've worked in the digital space, and you've worked for nonprofits. There's not a lot of people that I know who can kind of make that claim. So when you bring these two voices together, hopefully the synthesis is something that's going to be unusual and helpful to people who want to understand sort of the nation that we are existing in from a creative and business perspective. So I think that is our collective lane. But so do you agree?
Yeah, no, I think so. And I think that just real fast, I think I think that's right. In the dawn of social, the first social media account I created was on MySpace. So, and actually it was the first global brand presence on any social media. It was with Oxfam America. But back then you kind of had to learn all the lanes, because the lanes didn't exist. So you had to know social media. You had to do email, then came video, and then came in photos and audio. So kind of had to do it all, which now, and it makes sense that it's this way, that it's all specialized as it should be. But there was a moment in time where it wasn't. The only thing I would add also is that I don't think that there are a lot of people who look like me that talk about this stuff in a holistic way. I think there's plenty of LinkedIn influencer people that are doing that stuff, but from a left-leaning values perspective, and I've worked in business too, so I've done that too, but I don't think there's many people that are talking about trans issues, LGBTQ women's issues, let's say a Zennial / Gen Xer like me. So having all that experience and then having some of that values driven approach, I think is unique. So yeah, I think you nailed my lane.
Thank you. I'm so glad I did. So I want to just really quickly pivot to one thing that we talked about in preparation for this episode, which was that as the social media space in particular has been I think net terrible for journalism. For a while, journalists, I think, were just kind of and I listen, I was one of those people that was, and I'm not. I'm very quick to say I don't really care if I protect newspapers. I care about protecting journalism and the distribution of fact and records of truth and things like that. And I think that overall, when you kind of hash it all out, the social media ecosystem and the companies that ran it found greater value in not investing in records of truth and allowing all kinds of just bullshit to fly free on their networks and so forth. That includes YouTube, by the way. They get left out all the time.
Yep.
But I also think there's this incredible opportunity now, like you said, because these distribution systems are so cheap. You can set something up. It is very labor intensive. So I'll say the barriers to entry in terms of labor are still pretty high, because you got to know how to do this stuff. We have someone who can edit our stuff. I'm hopeless at it. Tim, we're both we're dumb. Yeah. This morning I was Tim, you have to log into the right account or you can't record. And he was like, be right back. Yeah.
And of course I did the wrong one, but yeah.
That's okay. It's fine. It's fine. It's all good. We have good people. Yeah. So one of the things that I thought was a real loss to the business community were these sort of niche B2B publications that helped PR people find. So the B2C community has a different problem, which is everyone's everywhere all the time, soon will be, right? How do you find, it was easier when everybody was sort of on one or two social platforms to kind of buy an ad campaign, assume that everybody was eventually going to see it, even though I think the ad experience on Meta has become increasingly poor and the one on YouTube is bizarre. I'm sure if they could go back in time, they'd be like, why did we ever let people skip ads? Why did we ever let people skip ads? By the way, YouTube, let people drop in their own ad marks. How is that not a thing yet? It's so dumb. Yeah. Anyway, it's probably a reason. So now that we are kind of in this new phase of, hopefully, fingers crossed, and we're talking about information distribution, we're talking about getting in front of people, I think that now is the most interesting time ever to become a PR person. That is counterintuitive, because the old way of doing PR is very different than the new one. Yep. I think, Tim Fullerton, you should talk to people about what this new opportunity is for business to business communication professionals, as well as sort of messaging people who are looking to spread, let's say, just good information about good people, which is kind of our shtick.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is a great time if you understand the landscape, right? Like you said, the traditional, I'm going to write a press release and send it to reporters and then maybe follow up. Those days have died. I mean, I am so excited for the day that press releases are finally nuked, for the last time, because they are just a giant time suck and they don't work. But if you are, and I think the challenge with the PR thing though, is that you also have to have a business sense at this point, because the tradition
100%. Yes.
Right. And because you can't just report about this stuff or talk about this stuff, you have to be able to look at the entire ecosystem that has completely changed. You need to know about the Fediverse stuff. You need to know about all of these online communities, these podcasts and influencers. Like, it's a whole thing. And if you can play in that space, like we do with Fullerton Strategies, you know, I think that it can be incredibly valuable because people are desperate for this help. But you have to essentially build a lot of this on your own. You know, like you can see there's some models that are starting to pop up. There are journalists who are on their own now and doing very well. Mehdi Hassan has launched this Zeteo vertical, and he had backing, by the way. So this is not a bootstrap thing. Like, he got funding, but like, they are building their own ecosystems of newsletters, of short form videos, of long form content. And you kind of have to know all of that stuff. Like, no longer can it just be like, I have the connections and I know these people and I can like get an article written. You need to know the whole thing. And
I will just say, like, if you're a media professional and you haven't done this work already, shame on you. What have you been waiting for? Where have you been? I've been screaming at professional media people that I know for years, politely, to get their business heads on and become more entrepreneurial. And this isn't to say that every journalist is going to become an entrepreneur, but journalists, the times are different. We have to figure out you have to own that a little bit, right? And the same is true, like you said, for communication strategists. You have to think a little bit more like an entrepreneur. You have to think, it just is what it is. If you want a sustainable job and you want to do good work, that's the future we're moving into.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because a lot of the people that come to us, they're not actually looking for straight like comms as we traditionally knew it. They want to know how to get their message out to the digital channels. They want to know how to engage with these, high visibility profiles that are out there. And, they're seeing really good success with it, but you have to know each of these channels and how to operate within them in order for that to be successful. So it is a mix of being a good writer and a strong strategist, but also like understanding the differences between Threads and Reddit and Blue Sky and YouTube. Like, they all have different approaches. So
100%.
But you have to educate yourself. And the only way that you can do that is immerse yourself in that space.
That's right.
And then also like know how to run a business, because it's probably going to be you, which requires learning, QuickBooks or a certain version of that, and understanding how to set up a business. Like, when I did this, setting up an LLC, I was like, what the hell is that?
Right.
But I figured it out. It didn't take that long. It's a little bit of an annoying process, but like, it's all of these pieces. Like, people basically have to become Swiss Army knives is basically what I'm saying.
That's right. That's right. So I'm going to ask folks that are listening, we need to hear from you in terms of what you need to know, because Tim and I are very serious about understanding what the problems are and the challenges that we face as we are, economic instability isn't good for anybody. And I personally don't think that the future that the far right has in store for America is going to include prosperity for a lot of people. So I feel like this is a business conversation that we need to have. So our email is hello@politigoodpod.com. Send us your questions. Send us your thoughts. We'd love to start doing some lives. We'd love to start doing some kind of like workshop-y kind of things for people. Send us your ideas. We want to hear them. And we will be back with another episode. I'm excited about our next guest. I cannot wait. It's going to be a surprise, but I'm super excited. And we already also have some really interesting CEOs lined up. So I think the future is at least what we can also do. And maybe I'll end here and then I'll kick it to Tim and he can close this out.
Sure.
You have to make your own future bright. If you make your own future bright, if you find the light in your own future, you are going to create a space where other people can join you, and you can share your shine. And that's what I would say is that share your shine, suppress your ego, become kinder, worry less about your own individuated success, and figure out how you can bring other people along with you collaboratively. Correct, Tim Fullerton? And then close out.
That is correct. And I would say that we know that is not as easy for every single person that may be listening. Certain people will have advantage over the other. And that's why we want to also be here to help. PolitiGood is sort of the podcast is sort of the beginning of a journey to, one, talk about all these things, but like really to educate everybody and help people in the best we can to help them with their careers or understand the political, media, business landscapes and all that stuff, because we've done it for so long. So we want this to be collaborative. So please go to PolitiGoodPod.com and sign up. Newsletters are coming. We do have membership tiers. I got to put the pitch in because this is not free, but we have a tier that's $5 a month. Which will be including these live streams and some more content and helps us keep the lights on, literally the light that I have blasting in my face right now. But I know it's a hard journey and it's overwhelming, but that's why we want to be part of the solution and help people along the way. So there we go. So I want to thank Rachel, as always, for being here. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Thank you for all the support so far. Being in a top 20 on any of the iTunes, it's not iTunes, Apple Podcasts is amazing. So thank you for doing that. If you haven't rated us, please do that. Please comment on iTunes because that helps Apple Podcasts because that lifts us up. I'll get that right at some point. And connect with us on social media too. We want this to be a full 360 thing. So thank you all so far for the success. You guys are amazing. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you soon.
Today's episode was produced by Rachel Parker and Tim Fullerton. Audio, music, and engineering by Chris Lombardo. Our assistant producer is Lizette Nolasco. Find us wherever you listen to podcasts and watch entire episodes on our YouTube channel. Sign up for premium content and more at PolitiGoodPod.com or email us at hello@PolitiGoodPod.com.